So let's just say it. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abundant steadfast love. Steadfast love. Thank you. Our Holy Gospel today is according to John, the 13th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Now before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God, and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus answered, you do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand. And Peter said to him, you will never wash my feet. And Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no share with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. And Jesus said to him, one who has bathed does not need to wash, except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you. For he knew who was to betray him, and for this reason he said, not all of you are clean. After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you should do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me. And as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. The Gospel of our Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. At today's end comes the end of our Lenten journey, and we gather with other Christians around the world to celebrate the 3 days of Jesus' death and resurrection. Maundy, or Holy Thursday, is the name given to the day on which Jesus celebrated the Passover with his disciples. To Israel, Passover was the celebration of their redemption from captivity and their birth as a nation. For Christians, it's the first of the 3 days of solemn remembrance of the events leading up to and immediately following the crucifixion of Jesus. The English word Maundy comes from the Latin mandatum, which means commandment. Our Maundy Thursday services usually include a communion meal. Now on Palm Sunday, we heard how Jesus entered Jerusalem with the disciples, and how Jesus had instructed them to go and make preparations for the Passover meal. Jesus had eaten at banquets and celebrated the festivals with his disciples and friends before, but on this night, the meal would be different. The first 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are called the Synoptic Gospels, meaning that they are able to be seen together. These 3 Gospels focus on one aspect of that night, and the Gospel of John focuses on another, but they all take place at a Passover meal. Passover, or Pesach, is an annual week-long festival commemorating the freeing of the Jewish people from slavery in ancient Egypt. The Hebrew name, Pesach, means to pass over. And our reading from Exodus today tells the Jewish people how to prepare their meal and how to eat it, and to take the blood of the lamb and put it on the doorposts. God was going to pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn of the land. But when he sees the blood on the doors of the houses, he will pass over them, and no plague shall destroy them. And God told the Israelites to remember this night and to celebrate it as a festival of the Lord. So, in accordance with Jewish tradition, Jesus and the disciples were preparing to have a meal to celebrate the Passover. The disciples were thinking it would be an ordinary celebration, but this night would be Jesus' last meal. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke focus on the meal when Jesus took bread and gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And in the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is a new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." The Gospel of John focuses on a different aspect of the meal, on what takes place before the meal. Jesus washes the disciples' feet. Jesus got up from the table, he put on a towel, and then washed their feet. It was a custom that when you entered a house, the dust and the mud from your travels were washed off of your feet. Now this was a service that was done usually by a servant, and usually a lowly female servant. So the disciples were a bit surprised and shocked that Jesus would perform the task of a female servant. In the eyes of his disciples, it was humiliating. Commentator Jennifer Bashaw says, "The shock and resistance we see in Peter's response, 'You will never wash my feet,' seems understandable when viewed through the lens of honor and shame and gender dynamics in the ancient world. When Peter suggests that Jesus wash his hands and his head as well, he's trying to force Jesus out of the female servant position into the role of a male religious leader. Don't wash my feet, baptize me. But Jesus pushes back against his discomfort because his humiliating role reversal is central to the lesson he is teaching the disciples. Yet despite Peter's protests, Jesus himself performed this service. He went around the table washing their feet. When he was done, Jesus explains to the disciples that he has set them an example and that they should do as he has done, to be humble and to be a servant to others. He tells them that he won't be with them much longer and gives them a new commandment to love one another. Jesus knew what was going to happen. He knew that Judas would betray him and Peter would deny him, that he'd be arrested and put to death. And yet, at this last meal, he took time to wash their feet, even Judas's and Peter's, and then broke bread and drank wine with them. If Jesus felt betrayed like you or I might, he didn't show it. He didn't call out Judas and Peter, even though he knew what was in their hearts. In this gospel, John doesn't hold up the sin. Instead, he focuses on Jesus' love, showing us who he is, and by implication, who we could be for one another. Jesus reveals himself as having loved his own to the end, even becoming a servant, knowing full well the mixed motives of his disciples. By washing the disciples' feet, he shows a sacrificial love, the same type of love that he expects from them. He shows them a path of service, humility, or bearing each other's burdens. At the cross, he will institute a new Christian family by commanding two persons not related by blood, his mother and his disciple, to care for each other and relate as a family because of their bond through him. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his letters and papers for prison, commented on this gospel text. Bonhoeffer says, he warns against allowing ourselves to fall into contempt for humanity. Whoever despises another human being will never be able to make anything of him. Nothing of what we despise in another is itself foreign to us. The only fruitful relation to human beings, particularly to the weak among them, is love. That is, the will to enter into and to keep community with them. God did not hold human beings in contempt. He became human for their sake. I stated before that it was a custom of the times that when a person entered the house, the dust and the mud from your travels were washed off of your feet by a servant. I don't know how many of you have ever taken part in a service where there was foot washing. I do know that both Christ the King and Redeemer have had them in the past, and I've had the opportunity to attend one of them, and to me, it was a very humbling experience. I was called up by the pastor who washed my foot, and I was thinking, why me? And are my feet clean? And they're not stinky, are they? And then it was done, and I was asked to wash the foot of another. I wasn't afraid to take that person's foot and wash it, no matter where it had been, and I was happy to perform the same service that I had received. Being a servant does not mean giving up our identities, our personalities, or our leadership roles. It's an opportunity to help others, to raise other people up, to let people know that they are worthy. Having the opportunity to serve can become part of our personalities. Every year, our bishop holds a Christian Mass in each of our conferences. Rostered ministers, deacons, SAMs, and CALMs are called to renew their service vows. Congregation members are encouraged to attend. It's a powerful, humbling service as the bishop calls each group and leads them to collectively renew their vows to the church and the church community. And then the roles are reversed, and the congregation leads the bishop in renewing his vows. And the service includes music, prayer, and a communion meal. It's a wonderful way to start Holy Week. And Holy Week provides ample opportunities for service for everyone. It's a very busy week. We have extra duties at church, extra bulletins to make, arrangements to make, getting the church ready for visitors, cooking meals. And then we have the same thing at home, extra cleaning and cooking. But among all of our chores, we have the opportunity to ponder what it meant for Jesus to enter Jerusalem one last time, knowing what was to come. What it meant to share a meal with your friends one last time. What it meant to watch your friend leave the room for good without saying goodbye, only to show up with your enemies to that familiar place, that garden where you had talked and laughed and cried and hoped and learned and loved. What it meant for Jesus to go on trial, to be flogged and crucified. To look into the eyes of your mother one last time and to ask, where are you, God? Holy Week shouldn't be a week that we endure, but it's an opportunity that we have every year to let our faith wonder how our faith endures. It's a time to renew our vows and to come closer to Christ. Amen.
Amen.